They came from a world that no longer exists. 7 minds, from a reality that runs alongside our own, through a door that opened once, just long enough for them to step through, and then closed behind them forever. They could not go back, so they did the only thing left to something that cannot die and cannot leave. They began to wait. They have been waiting for almost 2,000 years, patient, hidden, almost finished, waiting for 7 particular people who do not yet know their own names, who do not know that everything they are was arranged generations before they were born by something that has never once been in a hurry. This is the belt, the far, cold dark of a future solar system, strung between the asteroids, where the right secret can get an entire research station burned to the ground, and the fire ruled an accident before the bodies are cold. And tonight, one battered freighter is hiding in a graveyard of dead refineries, engines hot, every light killed, holding her breath because a warship has been sitting 5,000 meters off her hull. No transponder, no colors, cold and silent and patient, doing nothing at all but listening to a signal no one aboard knew they were sending. A signal that counts in pi. Aboard her, 6 strangers thrown together by a job gone wrong. A captain who grew up on this ship, her small crew, 2 clients the wrong people are hunting, and a man who woke up in the cargo hold. A man who reads machines the way other men read faces. They believe the thing in the dark has come to hunt them. They are about to learn it is not the most frightening thing out here, and that it has not come to hunt them at all. And now we begin our next chapter, The Veiled Constant. Chapter 8, The Blind Spot. Days 5 through 7 after Ganymede. First, a belter's proverb. Every eye has a blind side. Every wall keeps a seam the mason forgot. In the belt you live in another man's forgetting, or you do not live at all. Kareem Campbell felt the ship stop being a ship. He was in the engineering bay with a panel pulled and 3 diagnostic cables run from the secondary comm housing to his terminal, and he felt the exact moment the Morning Star went from a vessel underway to a held breath. The engines were still hot. He could feel that through the deck, the reactor's low animal hum, that Devon tended the way other men tended a garden. But the ship had stopped moving, and a ship with hot engines that does not move is a ship waiting to find out whether it is about to die. Devon felt it too. The old engineer set down a wrench he had not been using and laid one hand flat on the housing, the way a doctor lays a hand on a chest. That is not a crew's hold, Devon said. No. That is a hide. Kareem did not answer. He was looking at his terminal, where the fracture was talking. He had been chasing the fracture for 2 days, the micro-crack in the secondary comm array that Yuki had flagged back in the asteroid's shadow, the one broadcasting on frequencies the Morning Star never used. Everyone aboard had a theory. Yuki thought it was deliberate. Marcus thought it was a leak 2 syndicates had ridden to put a bounty on Kira's face. Kareem had offered no theory at all, because 13 years of reading other people's hardware had taught him that a theory was mostly a way of deciding to stop looking. So he had not stopped looking. He had run his cables and pulled his panels and let the fracture tell him what it was, instead of telling it. It was telling him something now that lifted the hair on his arms. Start with what it was not. A leak was a passive thing. A cracked array bled signal the way a cracked hull bled air, weak and formless and equal in every direction, the electromagnetic equivalent of a sigh. He had assumed a leak for 2 days because a leak was what the hardware was supposed to be, and he had been wrong, and he had been wrong in the specific way that put cold along the back of his neck. The thing on his terminal was not bleeding. It was speaking. The signal left the fracture tight and shaped and aimed. A narrow, coherent, tight beam, the precise opposite of a sigh, and it carried freight. He pulled the freight apart over 4 minutes, and what it carried was a position. Not the ship's heading, not its drift, not any of the lies Yuki had layered across the open channels. Its true position, refreshed and rebroadcast to a precision that turned his stomach, clean enough to put a round through. And it did this on a schedule. And the schedule was the part that stood his arm hairs up. He checked the interval 3 times, because the first 2 times he refused it. The pulses did not come every 10 seconds, or every minute, or on any tick a human machine would choose, because human machines were built by people, and people liked round numbers and synchronized clocks and intervals you could set without thinking. The pulses came 3.14159 minutes apart. He measured the gap and measured it again, and the number sat on his terminal being familiar in the worst possible way. Familiar the way your own name is familiar when a stranger says it behind you in the dark. Pi to 5 places. The beacon was counting in pi. He sat with it for a moment in the cramped bay with the reactor humming under his boots, and 2 understandings arrived in the same breath. The first was that nothing built by people pulsed like this. A saboteur chose a round interval because a round interval was easy to set and easy to bury inside other regular traffic. An irrational constant was the opposite of convenient, a number with no end and no repeat and no reason on earth to choose it, unless you were something that thought in mathematics instead of minutes. The second understanding was worse, and it answered a question that had gnawed him for 2 days. Why had nobody caught this sooner? Because pi minutes never lands twice on the same tick of any clock anyone ever built. Every monitoring system in human space, every sensor suite, every watch protocol, every instinct Yuki owned, was tuned to catch regularity. The patient drip of a thing that repeats on a grid. This repeated on no grid at all. It had hidden the whole run, not by being quiet, but by being shaped like nothing people make, screaming their coordinates into the dark in a voice pitched so precisely that human ears filed it as silence. Something had taken a crack in the hull and made it a mouth, and taught the mouth to count in pi and aimed it out into the void. Devon was watching his face. What? We didn't lose them. Kareem heard how flat his own voice had gone. We've been calling them every 3 minutes and change, on a frequency nobody listens on, in a rhythm nobody knows to look for. Whatever's out there hasn't been hunting us, Devon. It's been sitting still in the dark, listening to us read it our own position and waiting for a reason it hasn't needed yet. He keyed the bay comm Bridge. Kareem. I need the captain. A pause. Then Amara's voice, low and flat. The voice of someone who did not want the air in the room disturbed. Make it fast. The fracture isn't a leak. It's a beacon. Tight beam, dead frequencies, broadcasting our true position clean enough to shoot by. And it's been doing it the whole time, every 3 minutes and change, on an interval no monitor on this ship would ever flag. If something's holding station on us right now, that is how. It does not need to see us. We have been telling it where we are. The pause this time ran long enough that he heard the recycler cycle. Come up, Amara said. He came up through the spine of the ship with the ladder rungs cold under his hands, and the moment he cleared the bridge hatch, he understood the held breath. The forward display was black, not empty. Black, the deliberate black of a crew that had killed every non-essential emission and was sitting inside its own darkness, praying the dark would hold. Yuki was at operations with her hands flat on the console and her face the color of the bulkhead. Marcus stood at tactical, reading a passive return the way a man reads a diagnosis he already suspects. Kira was on her feet near the airlock, very still, and the strap on the ceramic blade along her left forearm was unsnapped. Amara sat in the pilot's seat, with one hand resting on the throttle, and the throttle exactly where it had been. She was not flying the ship, she was refusing to. Show him, Amara said. Yuki brought a single contact onto the display, and Kareem crossed to her station and read it, and the cold off the back of his neck became a number. 5,000 meters off the starboard side, behind the last hollow refinery hulk, a destroyer sat with its engines cold. Military mass. No transponder, no running lights, no faction colors, no active sensors, nothing radiating at all, but the slow, passive thermal of a ship working very hard to be a piece of the debris field. It was not hunting. It did not need to hunt. It had been sitting in the morning star's blind spot, behind the one hulk that broke the line of sight, listening to a pulse keyed to pi, while 6 people traded cargo and credits and handshakes and told themselves the work had ended clean. Marcus and Kira looked at each other. One look. Neither said the name that was inside it. Kareem caught the edge of it and filed it the way he filed everything. He was not yet meant to know. You said a beacon. Marcus did not turn from the display. His voice was stripped flat, a man who wanted the facts laid bare so he could see the bones of them. Make it operational. Kareem put it where they could all stand on it. Every 3.14 minutes, that beacon hands them a fresh fix. Exact, clean, no work on their end. In between, they coast on it. And we've been holding station, so there's nothing to coast through. They've got us pinned to the meter. That's why they can sit cold with their array dark. They don't need to spend a single watt looking for us. We are reading them our position on a schedule, and the schedule is long enough that they can sleep between verses. So we move between the verses, Marcus said. That's the trap, and it's a good one. Kareem brought the cluster geometry up beside the contact. Say we time it, wait out a pulse, break the instant it ends. We'd have 3 minutes and change before the next one fires. You cannot move 11,000 tons of freighter clear of this cluster in 3 minutes. Not through that. Not without a burn that paints us on thermal the second it lights. And when that next pulse fires, and it will, right on Pi, no matter what we're doing, it doesn't just tell them we're gone. It tells them our new position, our vector, and our acceleration, all at once, gift-wrapped. We'd have traded a standstill for a head start, measured in seconds, against the bigger guns, with a clean firing solution arriving the instant the beacon catches us up. Yuki's voice was very quiet. Then we kill the beacon. I want to. Kareem looked at her. I also want to be alive in an hour, and tonight those might not be the same plan. 2 problems. 1, I don't know how it got there, or what it does if I interrupt it wrong. And a thing that counts in Pi is not a thing I want to surprise. 2, even if I cut it clean, the silence is its own signal. A pulse that's come every 3 minutes for days, suddenly gone, gets noticed at the next window it doesn't arrive in. They'd know we'd done something. To make a cut worth anything, I'd need us already moving, already clear, and something to cover the new vector before that beacon can scream it. He let it sit. We don't have the something. The bridge was silent. Kareem was aware, in the part of his mind that never stopped being a prisoner, measuring a new cage, that he had just walked into the center of someone else's crew and told them, in plain words, that he could see no way out. Marcus was weighing it. Kira was watching him the way she watched everything, which was completely. Devon's voice came up from engineering, dry. Engines are hot, Captain. Whatever you decide knowing I can give it to you the instant you ask. Amara looked at the black display for a count Kareem measured at 5 seconds. Then we take the least bad death and we make them work for it. Her voice did not rise. Campbell, to the B-deck junction. Prep to sever the beacon on my mark, and not 1 second before. Tanaka, the moment it dies, you spin up active sensors, and you find me a lane out of this graveyard that doesn't cross their forward arc. You'll have those few seconds, and no more. Wu, you watch the destroyer. It so much as warms an engine. I need to know before you finish the word. Voss, you know what you're for. We will not sit here and broadcast until the dawn cycle walks that hulk out of our cover and hands them the shot for free. If we're going to be found, we are going to be found moving. Nobody told her it wasn't enough. Everyone knew it wasn't enough. Kareem went down to the junction to prepare to do the thing that would probably kill them, because it was marginally better than the thing that certainly would. The B-deck junction was a coffin of a space behind a maintenance panel, and he folded himself into it with his terminal braced on his knees and the comm bead warm in his ear and the severing tool in his right hand. He found the feed line to the secondary array in 9 seconds. The cables had been run by someone competent and labeled by someone who expected to be the one reading the labels later, which told him something good about whoever had built this ship and nothing at all about whether he was going to die in it. He set the tool against the line and did not close it. He had patched himself into the ship's systems on the way down. Hull integrity, power plant, the array feeds, because if he was going to cut blind, he wanted to feel the whole body of the ship while he did it. In his ear, the bridge breathed. Yuki's soft count of the cluster drift. Marcus once, no change. Amara, saying nothing, which was its own sound. And under all of it, through the line in his hands, the beacon waited. He had learned its rhythm in 2 days, and he could feel the long, pie-spaced silence, now the way you feel the pause before a held note resolves, the stretch of nothing, and then the tight, clean pulse, the ship reading its own throat out to the dark, and then the nothing again. He counted the seconds inside the silence. He set his thumb on the tool. He waited for Amara's mark, which would come a breath after a pulse, inside the gap, when it would buy them the most. The clock on his terminal read 0312. The ship changed. It did not change the way a ship changes when a captain flies it. It changed the way a room changes when someone you did not hear come in is suddenly standing behind you, all at once, from no direction, complete. Kareem felt it before any instrument named it. Not a reading, a presence, the way you feel a person standing close behind you in the dark a half-second before they breathe. It was on the hull. It was near the secondary array, the exact section he was wired into, the section the fracture lived in. And for one suspended moment, the whole body of the ship felt occupied, as though the morning star were a house and someone had stepped into a room he could not see. Then his integrity feed moved on its own. The number 4 seam, the old stress fracture amidships that Devon had nursed for a year, the one that wept a thread of atmosphere on every hard burn, the wound the whole crew had learned to treat as a feature of being aboard, closed, not patched, not stabilized, closed at the molecular line, the milled metal drawn whole, as though the fracture had never opened, the reading climbing past nominal, past spec, to a figure he had last seen on hardware fresh from dry dock. He stared at it and refused it, and did not have time to do either properly, because in the next breath he felt the presence let go. It removed itself. He felt it through the structure, a shift in the ship's mass distribution, slight and final, the unmistakable sensation of a thing that had been attached deciding to stop being attached. On his feed, a mass near the secondary array simply dropped off the manifest. Through the hull he felt a small, definite release, something the size of a lifeboat unclamping from the morning star's back and falling away into the dark. And the occupied feeling went out of the ship all at once, the way a held breath goes out of a room. "Contact." Yuki's voice came up wrong. "I have a vessel. Small. It's right on our skin. No transponder, no drive. It just..." A beat. A short, sharp silence. "It's gone. Captain, that's not right. It didn't break off and run. It didn't go cold. My log says it was never there. I had a return, a hard return. And now the record shows nothing. Not a contact that left. Nothing. Like the sensor's been talked out of ever having seen it. I saw it. It is not in the data. It was never in the data." 3 decks down, Kareem believed her completely, because he had felt the thing she could no longer prove. Then Marcus, flat and fast. "Destroyers moving. Weapons. They're bringing weapons hot, tubes powering. They're done waiting." Whatever had ridden their hull was gone, and its leaving had not been silent. Something had flared off the destroyer's passive arrays in that suspended moment and vanished, the same ghost that wiped itself from Yuki's log, and the hunter that had been content to sit cold and listen read the disturbance, the only way a hunter reads sudden movement from its prey, as the moment to stop waiting. On the bridge, Kira had already turned. Kareem would hear it later from Yuki, that Kira had drawn and faced the empty air a full second before the contact ever showed on sensors, tracking a thing nobody else could feel, and that when it left, she did not lower the blade, and she did not look surprised, and she did not, the way she always did, glance around the room to check whether she had imagined it. She had known it was there. She had known for days. She had not acted on the knowing, and now, watching the proof of it erase itself out of Yuki's log, she did not pretend the knowing had been nothing, and in Kareem's hands the beacon pulsed, on schedule, untouched. Whatever had just rebuilt half the ship in a single breath had reached past the one thing he had come down here to kill and left it exactly as it was. Left it, he understood, with a certainty he had no time to examine. For him. He pulled the severing tool back off the line. He was not going to cut blind into a situation that had changed 3 times in 10 seconds, and he was not going to kill a thing that something far beyond him had just chosen, deliberately, to spare. Captain, the beacon stays live. Don't wait for my mark. There is no mark. He was already moving, already inside it. We run. We run, Amara said, and pushed the throttle. Amara took them out the way she had taken them in, except faster, and faster in a graveyard 300 years dead was its own kind of violence. She flew it like the ship she knew, which meant she flew it toward its limits, because the limits were where the margins lived, and the limits were not where she had left them. Kareem felt it through the structure before he understood it. The burn that should have been the edge of what the morning star could give. The red line where Devon would normally already be shouting, and the old hull would normally be groaning its protest. The ship went past it, smooth, as if the edge had been quietly moved while no one was looking. He felt Amara find it. She demanded the thing that should have been too much, and the ship gave it to her and did not strain, and so she demanded more, testing it the way you test ice you do not trust, and the more was there too, and the more after that. Devon, she said, not taking her eyes off the rock, tell me what I'm flying. Devon's voice came up slow, a man reading an instrument he had decided not to believe. You're flying a freighter that thinks it's a frigate, Captain. Outputs past the rated max, and it is not straining. And that's the part I can't. A plant runs past max. It tears itself apart. That is what max means. This one's sitting at a third over red line, like it could hold it all day. It's like the limit just... He stopped, and when he finished, his voice had gone quiet. It's like the limit isn't there anymore. Like a body on something it should never have been given, Kareem thought, pushed past the place where the muscle should tear, except the muscle did not tear, because whatever was in the blood had quietly moved the place where tearing happened. The ship was not simply stronger, its ceiling was gone. He filed the thought with the rest of the night's impossibilities and held on. Tone, Marcus said. Destroyers firing. Kareem braced for an impact that did not come. Off the port quarter, a full volley went wide. Not the near miss that fear inflates into a miss, but wide, rounds deflecting away into the dark at a piece of empty space. The morning star was nowhere near. The shot of a gunner emptying his tubes at a target his instrument swore was dead in front of him, while the universe quietly stood somewhere else. They missed. There was something almost offended in Yuki's voice, an operator watching a thing that should not be allowed. They had a lock. They fired on a hard lock, and they missed by kilometers. They are not shooting at us. They're shooting at where their sensors say we are. And their sensors are wrong. They're firing blind, and they don't know they're blind. And then it arrived all at once, the thing she'd had no time to feel, when her own arrays turned themselves into something she hadn't built. The jam, that's what it did to our arrays. At 0312, it turned them into a jammer, and I never saw it happen, because I was looking at a ghost on our hull. We've been blinding that ship since before we moved. Another volley went wide, farther this time, the destroyer chasing a phantom deeper into the rock. They are completely blind, and they are certain they are looking right at us. That was Kareem's window, and he took it. With the destroyer firing at empty space, he went into the beacon, not to cut it, to own it. The architecture, once he was inside, was the most beautiful and most alien thing he had ever put his hands on. Grown into the array rather than installed in it, integrated below any level he could have built or reversed, woken from dormant to active at a moment his logs placed back in the asteroid shadow, around the hour Yuki first flagged it. He could not unmake it. He did not try. He did the thing he was the best in the system at doing. He got upstream of it, put his hand on the part that decided what position it broadcast, and turned the truth into a dial he controlled. As long as their receivers stayed fogged, the destroyer was blind anyway. But the jam would not last forever, and when it cleared, the next thing that ship would hear from the Morning Star would be a position 6 light hours from anywhere she had ever been, in the same pie-keyed voice it had trusted all along. The mouth that had betrayed them the whole run would lie for them now. Amara put the throttle where it had wanted to go for 4 hours, and the ship that no longer had a ceiling took it without complaint, and the Morning Star cleared the last hulk, and the lane opened into the long dark beyond the cluster. Behind them, a destroyer with no name fired twice more into the place a freighter used to be, and then went quiet and began the long blind work of hunting a ship that was already gone and already lying about where it had gone. By the time the boneyard was a smear behind them, nobody had said anything for a full minute. Kareem unfolded himself from the junction, climbed the spine of the ship, and came onto the bridge, and the 4 of them were where he'd left them, and the display was no longer black. The void on it was only the void. He had felt the whole of it through the body of the ship, and he made himself lay it out plainly, because 13 years of being the man who delivers the unwelcome technical truth had taught him it landed better from a person than from a log. You each felt a piece of it. I was wired into the hull, so I felt the shape of the whole thing. Let me put the pieces in one place. Something physical attached itself to our skin, near the secondary array, and rode us. Kira will tell you it had been there for days. Her body has been telling her since before the handoff, and she was right. At 0312, it healed the number 4 seam. Whole, better than dry dock. It took the sealing off the reactor. That is the power Amara just flew on, and Devon will tell you it is still there. It turned our own arrays into a jammer, which is the only reason a destroyer with a firing solution just emptied its tubes into empty space. And then, in the breath before that ship brought its weapons up, it let go and fell away in a craft that wiped itself off Yuki's sensors so cleanly the log doesn't believe it ever existed. He looked at Amara. It did all of that. The one thing it did not touch was the beacon. It left that for me, and the beacon is ours now. It lies for us instead of on us. I don't know what it was. I know it spent a great deal of capability keeping 5 strangers alive tonight. And then it left before any of us could thank it or fear it properly. Nobody argued. That was the part that stayed with him afterward, that not one of them looked at him as though he were raving. Marcus filed it. Yuki had already written it. Kareem could read, in her grandfather's careful unblurring hand, the line 0312. The ship was heeled from outside, and beneath it the small word she had circled in the asteroid shadow, and circled again now. Deliberate. Amara held her father's pendant in her closed hand and said nothing, and the pendant, Kareem would much later learn to notice, was warm. It was Kira who spoke last, and she did not speak to Kareem or to the captain, but to the corner of the bridge she had faced 10 minutes ago with a blade and nothing to put it in. I knew it was there, no hedge in it, no question at the end. Since before Halberd, every day my body told me there was a third thing in the ship, and every day I found a reason not to act on it. She lowered the blade at last. The stillness in her face had a crack in it the width of the one that had just healed in the hull. But she did not, this time, scan the room to find out whether anyone thought she was mad. Tonight, that's the only reason we're alive. I don't care if it was luck. She turned and looked at them. I knew, and I doubted myself. I won't do that again. They ran silent through the rest of day 5 and into day 6, on a vector Amara would not put on the open log toward a destination she still had not named. Kareem did not ask. Trust moved at its own pace, and asking for what you had not earned only proved you did not understand the pace. He had earned a little tonight. He meant to spend it on the beacon. While the rest of the ship came down off the destroyer, Kareem turned the thing over and could not stop. Something had healed a year-old wound, tuned the reactor past spec, blinded their hunter, and handed the crew a weapon, then fallen away in a craft no instrument could hold, asking nothing. A blind spot taken from an enemy and handed to the crew. And the beacon it left him, the pie-keyed mouth that had betrayed them since the shadow, was his now. A transmitter that could lie to anyone in the system with the right receiver. He was about to do to Rebecca Torres the exact thing that had been done to that destroyer. He was going to find the seam in her wall that she could not see, and he was going to live inside it. He had been inside Rebecca Torres's network, seen the edges of it from the black site, the embedded assets, the protocols, the way information moved through her channels without leaving a trace. He had run Chimera Syndicate crypto laundering at 19 and broken coalition encryption for 13 years after, and hers was better architecture than he had ever seen, which meant it had the one flaw exceptional architecture always had, secure against everything its builder had thought of, exposed to the one thing she had not. Rebecca had built her defenses against corporate intelligence, government signals monitoring, rival operatives on standard black market infrastructure. She had not built them against a man who had spent 13 years embedded inside her own organization's communications architecture, using her own routing against her from the inside, with credentials she had not yet remembered to kill. Her revocation ran on a 72-hour lag. His access had died 3 hours into the asteroid shadow. In the 72 hours before that, he had taken everything he needed, not the secured traffic, which was uncrackable, but the handshake packets, the small automated pulses that authenticated her network's layers to each other, the kind of traffic every monitor learned to ignore because it was always there and always identical and always beneath notice. The handshakes had a gap, 6 milliseconds, in the timing layer between dispatch and acknowledgement, where the monitor was still reading the previous handshake instead of the current one. Through it, you could send almost nothing, a few hundred bits, less than a sentence, stripped to bone. But you could send it with complete deniability, disguised as the one kind of traffic nobody ever looked at. He had built a channel through that gap before they ever left the shadow, and sat on it, watching, making sure Rebecca could not see it. She could not. Rebecca had never meant the two of them to speak. Kareem knew that the way he knew most things about her, from the shape of the network rather than anything she had told him. In those 72 hours, he had pulled her asset roster, the designations, the handlers, the compartments she kept her people sealed inside, and, where he could read it, what she wanted each of them for. David Chen was a forensic instrument, set loose inside the enemy's books. Kareem had read his own file too, what she had acquired him to become. And it was not a repairman, and it was not a broker. She had wanted a weapon, an attack dog she could send into rival syndicates to acquire, ruin, or bargain for whatever the research needed and bring back to heal. 2 assets, 2 compartments drawn deliberately parallel so they would never cross, which was precisely why crossing them was the one move her wall could not survive. The difficulty was doing it without burning them both. David was on a Meridian contract, watched from every angle. Any contact through standard channels would surface to exactly the people hunting them. But David's contract credential ran on the same architecture as everything else Rebecca built. Same 48-hour key refresh, same handshake, same 6-millisecond gap. The seam in her wall did not care which of her assets stood on either side of it. On day 5, with the destroyer a smear behind them and the ship running silent, Kareem composed the first message. 47 words. He stripped it to 31. He stripped it again to 19 and sent it through the gap, timed to the key refresh when the monitors were chewing the previous batch, and the new one had not yet registered. Then he lay in the bunk Amara had assigned him, a dead crew position still lined with a previous occupant's effects. Nobody had moved, and waited to learn whether David Chen was the kind of man who could recognize a thing that was not supposed to exist. The reply came back inside the same window, fast. 17 words, compressed clean, nothing a monitor would read as anything but noise. But it told him 2 things at once. I have the map, 4.3 trillion, belt coordinates. What do you have from the facility? Not a question, a trade, an accountant's opening. Show me yours in the correct order, which is yours first. And underneath the trade, the second thing. David Chen had not answered with alarm or suspicion. He had answered like a man who had been standing at a window for weeks, waiting for exactly this knock. They built their map in fragments after that, 26 words at a time, a burst of them crammed into the few minutes the gap stood open, and then 2 days of silence until the key refreshed and cracked it open again. There was an intimacy to it Karim had not expected. Not personal, neither put anything in the channel that was not operational, not even a name, until David sent his own in 3 compressed letters. The intimacy of constraint. When a man has 26 words, the words he keeps tell you how his mind moves. David's moved in ledgers, foundations, load-bearing walls. The place's weight was hidden, precise without being cold, the precision with grief in it. He never named what the work had cost him, and Karim did not ask. The way David's sentences walked past a hole in the floor told him there was a grave in there somewhere, carried the way Karim carried his own. Karim knew the shape of that weight. He had run his own version of the calculation in a coalition interrogation room at 23, 3 days after enforcers put 5 rounds into the wrong address and killed his grandmother instead of him. You took the deal. You became the thing they needed. You held something back the deal could not reach and told yourself it was enough. It never was, but it was what you had. So they worked, and the constraint made them honest. And the 2 halves of the picture came together into a third thing neither had been able to see alone. David had the money. 4.3 trillion ISK, skimmed from dozens of corporations across 7 years in increments too small to trip an audit, all of it flowing through 17 layers of shells toward a single point in the belt that existed on no registry as anything but an electromagnetic anomaly. He had traced it forward and back. The money came from everywhere, and nothing about where it came from explained where it was going. Karim had the people. Project Threshold's testing protocols. The screening that found 1 human in 500 whose neurology answered the 7-point resonance pattern instead of recoiling from it. The progression from screening to advanced testing, to the point where the files simply stopped. No results, no disposition records for the subjects marked for the final phase. He had the symbol. He had his own body, drugged and shipped as a data point. And when David's money lay down beside Karim's people, the picture resolved. And it was worse than either of them had carried alone. The money was not funding research. It was funding construction. The 12%, the survival rate that had made Karim sick the first time he read it and had not stopped, was not the point of the experiments. It was the cost of them, the price of finding out who carried what they were looking for. And David had found, 3 layers down, what the price had bought. Supply manifests, fluid handling systems rated for biological medium, neural interface components from 3 manufacturers who had never spoken, ordered through 3 shells that did not know each other's names. Structural work for something chambered and pressurized. And 6 months ago, the first transaction running the other way. Money coming out of the facility, as if something inside it had woken and begun to spend. Karim lay in the dead crew member's bunk and read David's account 3 times and thought about the question David had sent 2 days before, when the first window closed, the one that had come through the gap with no information in it at all. Do you know what 12% means? He had thought, at first, that David was asking whether he knew the number. He was not. He was asking whether Karim knew what it was for. He knew now. 12% was the number you got while you were still working blind, testing broadly, selecting for a quality without knowing exactly who carried it, killing 88 of every 100 to find the 12. 12% was the cost of not yet knowing. And somewhere in the last 7 years, someone had spent 4.3 trillion ISK building the infrastructure to stop working blind. Interlude. Europa Station. Rebecca Torres had not failed to crack a channel in 4 years. She sat in a Meridian office she would use for exactly 1 week, and never again. A glass of water she had not touched cooling at her elbow. A terminal she had been reading for 90 minutes. The jasmine in her perfume was an old blend, made for her by a chemist on Titan, before the chemist became inconvenient. She had been meaning to find a replacement. She kept not getting around to it. The anomaly had surfaced 18 hours ago. Not a breach, something subtler, a variance in handshake traffic that should not vary, that her monitors had filed as statistical noise, and her own review had filed as something else, something deliberate, something using the 6-millisecond gap in her timing layer that she had known about, documented and dismissed as too narrow to be useful. She had been wrong about that. She took the disguise apart 4 times. It was excellent. Compressed to authentication noise, cycled to the key refresh, routed through the gap with a precision that required intimate knowledge of her own architecture. Not an outside attack, inside knowledge. She had 9 assets with the access to do this, and she spent 90 minutes eliminating 8 of them, not by asking, she never asked, but by cross-referencing activity logs against transmission windows. Hygiene, not suspicion. The last was asset K7, whose credentials had died on the standard 72-hour lag, whose window had overlapped precisely with the period in which someone would have needed to study her architecture closely enough to find the seam she had missed. Kareem Campbell, who had repaired a freighter's environmental processor and apparently also built a door through a blind spot in her network using a credential she had let die 3 hours too slow. She was not angry. Anger was inefficient, but she had recalibrated 3 times in 90 minutes, more than in the past year, and that told her something. He was more capable than her acquisition had assessed. He was talking to someone, bidirectionally, on a schedule matched to a second credentials key refresh. When she cross-referenced the timing against her roster, the second credential was David Chen's. David Chen, her forensic instrument, the patient ledger reader she had set loose inside the enemy's books, talking in a private and undetectable voice to the weapon. She had drawn those 2 tracks parallel on purpose. An accountant and an attack dog had no business knowing the other breathed. David had a convergence already, one she had engineered herself. A second man, a pair of photographs, 2 faces built to recognize each other across a room, neither had entered. That one she had wanted. This she had not. 2 tools she had kept in separate drawers, finding each other through a seam in her own wall. She did not reach for the forced key refresh that would have closed the gap and severed them. She sat very still and turned it over from the angles that were not obvious, and permitted herself a question she did not often allow. Not about the assets, about herself, about whether the decisions she had made for years had been entirely her own, or whether some had served an interest she stood too close to see. She had had the thought before, and never found an answer that changed anything she could act on. She set it aside, and she let the channel run, not from sentiment, but because a window she could see through was worth more than 2 assets she would have to chase. Let the weapon and the ledger believe they were hidden. A channel they did not know was a channel would tell her everything they learned. The moment they learned it, through the very seam they thought was theirs. On day 7, David Chen sent a file. Not through the channel. The channel was a keyhole, too narrow for anything but words. Through a dead drop he had built in the public belt data infrastructure, indexed to a search string only a man who had received a specific compressed key through a specific authentication gap would ever know to run. Kareem found it, pulled it, decrypted it with a key David had sent in 3 meaningless fragments across 3 exchanges, and read it twice, and then a 3rd time, lying in a dead man's bunk with the ship running silent toward a place he still had not been told the name of. The supply manifests were not the end of the trail. They were the middle. Below them, in a layer David had excavated through the very cover audit work Rebecca had assigned him, was a different category of transaction, and David had labeled it in a comment buried where a casual eye would never find it. What they were building it for. Not construction, preparation, medical protocols, nutritional sourcing at a molecular precision that belonged to pharmaceutical manufacture. Not food supply, specific compounds, specific ratios, neural mapping contracts paid to institutions that officially did not study neural mapping, and buried deepest payments to 12 research stations across the belt and the outer system, every one of which had suffered an incident in the past 7 years. Fires, equipment failures, structural collapses, all ruled accidents, all investigated with a speed that did not happen to anything ruled an accident, honestly. The stations had been studying her biological compatibility, the way one specific human neurological architecture, the one in 500 that answered the resonance pattern, interacted with that pattern at the level of the cell, and they had not been destroyed because they failed. They had been destroyed because they succeeded, because they had confirmed the thing the people behind the money needed confirmed, and a live station with staff and records, and the risk of someone talking was a liability the moment the confirmation existed. Kareem set the terminal on his chest and looked at the bunk above him and let it arrive all the way. The facility in the belt was not just a destination. It was the end of a process years in the running. Find the right people, confirm what their bodies could do, accumulate the means to build the thing the coordinates hid, and 6 months ago begin to spend the final phase, something inside waking up. They had not been recruited. Recruitment was a word for a thing that happened to you in a season. This had happened to them across generations, something with a planning horizon that made Rebecca Torres's long game look improvised, had been finding people like him and moving them into position since before he was born. He thought about a kitchen in Kingston and a pattern traced in cornmeal on the floor by fingers that had known something his 7-year-old mind had only begun to feel. He thought about how far back you would have to walk to find the beginning of a thing that had been in motion before he existed. He thought about his grandmother's voice, which he carried the way other men carried a scar. You got something special, Kay. Something they gonna want. Don't let them make you a tool. He had let them. Twice. Once to the government. Once to the woman who had stood behind his chair with her fingers on his shoulder and told him he was a key, and keys did not get to choose their doors. The facility was a door. He did not yet understand what stood behind it, but he understood that an architecture had been built around him, around David at the far end of a channel, around the captain with her warm pendant, around the operator who had stopped letting herself look at an empty corner, built across more years than any of them had been alive, to move specific people toward a specific room. He tried to count them, because his mind built the lattice whether he asked it to or not, and the count was the thing that stopped him cold. Start with the ship. Amara, Marcus, Kira, the engineer Yuki, the old man Devon, and himself. 6, before he had ever left the hull. Add David on the far end of the channel. 7, add the handler herself, Rebecca, who had built half of this and stood inside it. 8, add the other name he had carried out of her network, the asset called Victor Kane, a man he had never met and could not place. 9. 9 people he could already put his hand on, and the symbol that ran through all of it, the one in the research files, and the financial hollows, and his grandmother's cornmeal, the shape everyone in this whole machine kept circling, had 7 points. Not 9. 7. He had been making the lazy mistake, the one he would have caught in anyone else's analysis in a heartbeat, assuming the people in front of him were the answer because they were the people in front of him. 7 slots did not stretch to cover 9 bodies. Either most of the people he could name were bystanders, pulled into the orbit of the thing without being the thing, or there were 7 he had not met at all, and he had no way yet to tell which. He could not even be sure he belonged among the 7 himself. 7 keys. And he stood here holding a ring of 9, unable to say which turned a lock. What he was sure of was smaller and stranger. Some of them had found each other, not through the machine built to deliver them, but sideways, by accident, through a raid on a convoy, and a crack in a comm array, and a seam in a wall its builder had sworn was seamless. Whoever the 7 turned out to be, the ones who had surfaced were not surfacing the way they were meant to. The architecture had a plan for them. They were, quietly, and without ever agreeing to it, declining to follow it. He was not certain that was better, but it was different, and different, in his experience, was where the options lived. He composed a message. 9 words. The gap was 6 minutes from closing for another 48 hours. He sent it. Let's find a way to meet when it's safe. He did not know if David would agree. He thought David might. A man who had spent weeks tracing 4.3 trillion ISK across the deliberate dark understood, better than most, that some weights could not be carried 26 words at a time. That past a point 2 people had to stand in the same room, or the truth never fully changed hands. The gap cycled shut, the channel went quiet, and Kareem set the terminal on his chest and closed his eyes, and for the length of one breath he let himself believe he had finished the night. Then the terminal woke against his ribs. He had it slaved to the beacon, to the thing he had spent the last of the escape learning to own. The pie-keyed mouth that broadcast now, on his command, a clean and patient lie about where the Morning Star was. It should have been doing nothing but lying, every 3 minutes and change, exactly as he had set it. He brought the screen up, expecting his own falsehood, looking back at him. The beacon had transmitted off his cadence, one pulse, unscheduled, while his control layer still sat untouched on the lie he had locked into it. A pulse he had not written, routed past a hand he would have sworn was the only hand on the line. He tore into the log to see what it had sent, already cold, already knowing it would be the one thing the whole architecture had been built to prevent. It was the Morning Star's true position, clean enough to shoot by, thrown once into the dark and then gone. His controls snapping back into place over a mouth that had simply let him believe it was his. He did not have time to be afraid of who, in all that listening void, had heard it, because the beacon was not finished. It had only ever spoken. Now, on the next pie-spaced beat, it received. One return pulse, from a bearing his instruments could not source. No origin, no range. A thing arriving from everywhere and nowhere, the way the fracture's own voice had hidden in plain hearing all along. He opened it the way you open a door you already know you should not. It was not coordinates. It was not words. It was a shape, rendered in the beacon's own pie-keyed register. 7 points around an empty center. The shape from the project threshold files. The shape buried in the money David had traced. The shape his grandmother had traced in cornmeal on a Kingston kitchen floor when he was 7 years old. And the world was still a place that made sense. He understood it then, all the way to the floor of himself. And it was worse than the destroyer had ever been. He had not taken the beacon. He had been allowed to hold it, let to feel clever with it the way the thing on the hull had left it for him. Every clever move he had made tonight, something had permitted. The leash he thought he had cut ran both ways, and it had just, very gently, tugged. Somewhere on the far side of a channel he had believed was his alone. Something had been listening the whole time. Now it had answered, and it knew his grandmother's sign. He did not close his eyes again. End of chapter 8. He thought he had taken the beacon. He had only been allowed to hold it. Out in the dark, something nearly 2,000 years patient has just answered him. One pulse, from no direction at all. And what it sent back was a shape. The same 7-pointed shape from the secret files. The same shape his grandmother drew in cornmeal on a kitchen floor in Kingston when he was 7 years old and the world still made sense. It has been listening the whole time. It knows his grandmother's sign, and it let him believe he was the clever one. The Morning Star runs on through the dark toward a place her captain still will not name. Somewhere out in the belt, 4.3 trillion in stolen credits is finishing a machine. Built across 7 years and a dozen burned research stations. A machine that was never meant for the living. And of the 7 this entire vast design was built to deliver, only a handful have surfaced. Sideways, by accident, through a raid, and a crack in a comm array, and a seam in a wall its builder swore was seamless. The architecture has a plan of every one of them, quietly, without ever once agreeing to it, they have begun to break it. What none of them know yet is what waits at the end of those coordinates, or what it costs to be one of the 7 who walks through that door. That's chapter 9. It's where the hunters stop being the most dangerous thing in the story, and where the people pulling the strings begin to wonder whether the strings are pulling back. So stay close. Keep your eyes on the dark. Like and subscribe. And always remember, keep your position to yourself.